This video is looking at the psychodynamic approach, which is closely associated with the work of Sigmund Freud. So let's have a think about Freud. In order to understand the approach and some of its main assumptions, it's really important to understand the man behind it. So this approach was one of the earliest approaches to emerge in psychology. So it came after Wundt established psychology as a science by opening up his first psychology lab in Germany. And it comes before behaviorism, which is the work of Skinner and Pavlov looking at classical and operant conditioning. And it originated in the late 19th and early 20th century. And the main figure associated with this approach is Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud was really interested in things like hysteria and psychiatric illnesses, and he believed that they were the result of early childhood trauma. And he thought that there were unconscious mental forces that were affecting our behaviour. And he came up with these ideas because he was working with a colleague, and together they were analysing Anna O, a woman with paralysis that had no physical cause. And they were able to cure her with hypnosis or with talk therapy. So it's from here that Sigmund Freud came up with his ideas that perhaps there was a part of our mind that we didn't have access to that was causing changes in our behaviour and our personality and causing some of these symptoms of hysteria. So this is the basis for his whole psychodynamic theory and the basis for psychoanalysis and psychotherapy as well. So I want us to really remember the time in which Freud was writing, otherwise it is completely bonkers. So we need to just remember that this was the late 1800s, this was the end of the Victorian era, and there was a hangover of those Victorian conservative values. It was a really repressed society sexually, and of course male-dominated as well. And this really feeds into a lot of Freud's ideas. So Freud talks a lot about the perverse sexual desires dominating the human mind. And he thought this was present in children, in adults with neuroses, but also in normal adults as well. And Freud spent a lot of time emphasising how the mind finds itself in conflict with its own sexuality, saying that the mind fears sexuality and dedicates a lot of resources to trying to avoid and eliminate and try and forget or remove sexuality from conscious awareness. So a lot of his theories revolve around this idea of sexuality, and it's as a result of the sexually repressed society at the time in which he was writing. So please do keep that in mind as we go and look at the assumptions of the psychodynamic approach. So there are 4 key ones that you need to be aware of, and we're going to be looking at each of these in quite a lot of detail. This video is only going to be looking at the importance and the role of the unconscious mind, and then in later videos you're going to be looking at the other 3. So we're going to be looking at the unconscious processes. So these are the happenings in the mind of which we are unaware, and these have a huge impact on our behaviour, our emotions, and our personality. Freud and other psychodynamic psychologists also believed that personality had 3 parts. This is known as the tripartite structure of personality. These are the id, the ego, and the superego, and these are in conflict with one another constantly, and this creates anxiety which our ego needs to manage through using defense mechanisms. Freud, amongst others, believed that early childhood experiences determine our adult personality and our adult behaviours. So who we are as adults is determined by early experiences. And when we look at the psychosexual stages of development, we'll look at how fixations or difficulties through early childhood development can manifest as issues and conflicts later on in life. But first, let's look at the role of the unconscious. So Freud believed that we have an unconscious mind, and this has a significant influence over our personality and behaviour. So our conscious mind is what we are aware of, but our unconscious mind contains everything that which we are unaware of. So all of those thoughts and emotions that aren't available to our consciousness. However, although we're not consciously aware of these things, they do influence us and they do influence our behaviour. But day to day, we're not aware of them. But they may reveal themselves through dreams. Freud famously referred to dreams as the royal road to the unconscious, and he spent a lot of time performing dream analysis, looking at symbols within dreams and how they are masking our true feelings and our true desires, and how by analysing dreams we were able to free the unconscious mind of its repressed wishes. And Freudian slips as well. So Freudian slips, I'm sure you've all made these gaffes from time to time. This is when you say something that is on your mind by accident. So an example might be accidentally calling your teacher mum, or it might accidentally be swearing when you don't mean to. There's lots of examples of newsreaders online making some pretty embarrassing Freudian slips, but they do happen to all of us from time to time. So our conscious mind prevents all of these traumatic and damaging memories and impulses from reaching our conscious awareness by employing defense mechanisms, which we're going to get into a little bit more detail later on. So let's have a look at the role of the unconscious. So Freud famously used the iceberg metaphor to describe the structure of the mind. And so you can see here that at the top we've got our conscious mind. This is the conscious. So this is what we are currently aware of. This is the small amount of mental activity that we know about. So these are our current thoughts and our perceptions. It is what we have access to. Just below the surface there, we have the pre-conscious. So this is where our thoughts and memories, which we're not currently aware of, but can access if we desire them, are stored. So memories and stored knowledge is just below the surface and is accessible to us. But below the surface and making up the most of our mind, so contributing the largest portion to our mind, is our unconscious. So the unconscious mind contains all the threatening and disturbing memories that have been repressed or locked away or forgotten. They also contain all of our biological drives and instincts, and all of that sexually repressed energy is all stored within our unconscious mind. So it's a vast storehouse of all of our deep, dark secrets, all of those biological drives and instincts that affect our behavior and our personality, although we can't access our unconscious. And our ego does a very good job of using defense mechanisms to keep all of these drives and instincts and disturbing memories below the surface and below our conscious awareness. So defense mechanisms, Freud described as being employed by our conscious mind to distort reality. So in order to prevent us from being aware of all of these traumatic memories that could damage our ego, we employ defense mechanisms in order to protect us from the anxiety that would arise if we were aware of these instincts and these disturbing memories. So when we face a situation that we're unable to deal with rationally because it causes us too much anxiety, we use defense mechanisms to reduce the anxiety and to protect our ego. Now, all of us use defense mechanisms from time to time. I'm sure you've been aware of friends using them, of parents using them, and that's not really a problem, but the excessive overuse of defense mechanisms can, over time, cause psychological disorders, or so Freud said. So psychoanalysis, the therapy that evolved as a result of the psychodynamic theories, they attempt to understand a person's use of defense mechanisms. And if they can understand how and why a person is using defense mechanisms, then they can access the underlying memories or feelings that those defense mechanisms are covering up. Hopefully being able to access the true source of the anxiety and then helping to ease that anxiety. So the three defense mechanisms that you need to be aware of are repression, denial, and displacement. So you need to know these pretty well. You need to know those clear definitions and some examples and be able to identify examples in a given situation as well. So let's start with denial. And I'm sure this is the most common one that you are aware of and have seen people using. And this is refusing to believe reality because it's simply too painful or too disturbing. So a person refuses to believe what is true and what is right in front of their eyes. So an example of this would be going to work even though you've been fired, refusing to accept that you no longer have a job, so you keep going to work. You haven't forgotten that you were fired, but you just refuse to accept that it's true. The second defense mechanism is repression, and this involves unconscious forgetting. So this is forcing a distressing memory from the conscious mind. So this is all to do with not being able to access disturbing or traumatic memories. So an example, and quite a common one, is that adults who have suffered from childhood sexual abuse or physical abuse often can't recall the details of that abuse because it was simply too traumatic. So they've employed defense mechanisms to protect themselves from the anxiety that would be produced if they were to remember that abuse day to day. And the final defense mechanism is displacement, and this is transferring feelings from the true source of a distressing emotion onto a substitute target, either an object or a person that wasn't the source of that emotion to begin with. So for instance, if you have a fight with your parents, you're really, really angry, but there's no outlet for you to express that anger towards your parents, otherwise it would be disrespectful and perhaps make the situation worse. So instead of showing your true feelings towards the object that caused or the person that caused, that feeling, you transfer that onto a substitute object by slamming your door. And that provides almost an outlet for that feeling. So there are other examples of bullies, for example, who are abused at home, but they can't retaliate and they can't express their feelings towards the source of their abuse. So instead they go to school the next day and they might bully younger children. So they're transferring their feelings from the true source, their parents, onto a substitute target, a younger child at school. So that is the role of the unconscious and the structure of our conscious, preconscious and unconscious mind, and also the ego defense mechanisms. So in the next video, we're going to be looking at the structure of personality and also the psychosexual stages of development.